Hi gang, welcome to Class Session 3, Theory and Research in Instructional Technology and Distance Education. A lesson about all the theories that are studied by and applied by instructional technologists and distance educators could keep us busy for many weeks. Fortunately, that's not what this lesson is about. My goal with this lesson is distinctly modest: to define theory, discuss why it's important for research in instructional technology and distance education, and identify a handful of theories that are of particular interest to ITDE researchers. A theory is a plausible or scientifically acceptable general principle or body of principles offered to explain phenomena. Why are theories important? Moore and Kearsley stated concisely, if you want to do research in distance education, you must know the theory. Further, knowing the theory is very valuable for everyone who wants to practice in distance education. For researchers, it is indispensable. Indispensable, they say, because the accepted facts and concepts that make up theory also provide a shared perspective for those who have studied it, and a common vocabulary for discussing, analyzing, or criticizing it. Putting this into practical terms, Moore and Kearsley point out that those who attempt research without a firm understanding of theory ask questions that have been answered, or that are unanswerable, and because they don't understand the vocabulary, they are confused, and they cause a great deal of confusion. In education, a lot of the information about technology that is collected and reported as distance education is not really about distance education at all, and is rather trivial in significance, while questions that do need to be researched are often overlooked. Note that this applies equally to research in the field of instructional technology. It is expected that instructional technologists and distance educators will be familiar with the main theories of learning and cognition: behaviorism, cognitivism, and constructivism. These theories, though, tend to be applied to the design and development of instruction and learning environments rather than to research. However, as philosophical foundations, they may color our research, often in subtle ways. The field of instructional technology has not been especially good at developing its own theories. Rather, most of the theories applied by its researchers, and practitioners too for that matter, were developed outside the field. Diffusion of Innovations, for instance, was borrowed from rural sociology. Cognitive load theory was borrowed from educational psychology. The field of distance education has been more productive, with at least 5 theories, but only one of them, community of inquiry theory, has been applied to more than a handful of studies. As with the field of instructional technology, distance education research draws upon a variety of theories, most of them borrowed from other fields. Let's begin with theories of distance education, then turn to theories that are applied in both IT and DE research. The most prominent theories of distance education are industrialization of education, guided didactic communication, reintegration of the teaching acts, transactional distance, and community of inquiry. Let's look at each in turn. Otto Peters observed that distance education, especially when it is practiced on a large scale, is similar to the industrial production of goods. He noted that the design of the educational process must be restructured to reflect this industrialization. The function of academics is significantly different. Teaching effectiveness depends on planning, courses must be formalized, and it is economical only with centralization. Drawing upon long experience with European distance education, Börje Holmberg developed a theory of guided didactic communication that had 8 principles. The first principle is, distance education serves individual learners who cannot or do not want to make use of face-to-face teaching. The second principle is, society benefits from distance education provision of, on the one hand, liberal study opportunities for individual learners, on the other hand, of professional or occupational training. The third principle is all learning concerned with the acquisition of cognitive knowledge and cognitive skills, as well as affective learning and some psychomotor learning, are effectively provided for by distance education. Holmberg's fourth principle is distance education is based on deep learning as an individual activity. The fifth principle is distance education is open to behaviorist, cognitive, constructivist, and other modes of learning. Holmberg's sixth principle is personal relations, study pleasure, and empathy between students and those supporting them are central to learning in distance education. The seventh principle is, while it is an effective mode of training, distance education runs the risk of leading to mere fact learning and reproduction of accepted truths. Holmberg concludes by noting that these elements represent, on the one hand, a description of distance education, on the other hand, a theory from which hypotheses are generated and which has explanatory power in that it identifies a general approach favorable to learning and to the teaching efforts conducive to learning. At the core of Desmond Keegan's theory of the reintegration of the teaching acts is this observation: the intersubjectivity of teacher and learner, in which learning from teaching occurs, has to be artificially recreated in distance education. Over space and time, a distance system seeks to reconstruct the moment in which the teaching-learning interaction occurs. Reintegration of the teaching acts may be achieved in three main ways. First, learning materials are designed to achieve as many of the characteristics of interpersonal communication as possible. Second, use of a variety of media and methods: communication by correspondence, telephone tutorials, online computer communication, comments on assignments, and teleconferences, video conferences, and computer conferences. And third, the possibility of some compulsory face-to-face experiences. Further, Keegan notes that in distance education there are 5 changes to the normal structure: industrialization of teaching, privatization of institutional learning, change of administrative structure, different plants and buildings, and change of costing structures. Having set this foundation, Keegan offers 3 hypotheses. The first is the separation of the teaching acts and the learning acts that is characteristic of distance education brings about a weak integration of the student into the life of the institution, and this has been linked to dropout. It is hypothesized, therefore, that distance students have a tendency to drop out in those institutions in which structures for the reintegration of the teaching acts are not satisfactorily achieved. Keegan's second hypothesis is the separation of the teaching acts and the learning acts brings about weaknesses in the achievement of interpersonal communication between the teacher and the student, and this has been linked to the quality of the learning achieved. It is hypothesized, therefore, that the status of learning at a distance may be questioned in those institutions in which the reintegration of the teaching acts is not satisfactorily achieved. Keegan's final hypothesis is the separation of the teaching acts and the learning acts places distance education among the non-traditional forms of education in which degrees, diplomas, and qualifications achieved may not receive full academic acceptance. It is hypothesized, therefore, that the status of learning at a distance may be questioned in those institutions in which the reintegration of the teaching acts is not satisfactorily achieved. For Michael Moore, transactional distance is the gap of understanding and communication between the teachers and learners caused by geographic distance that must be bridged through distinctive procedures in instructional design and the facilitation of interaction. Transactional distance is bridged through three components: dialogue, that is, the interaction between instructor and student, structure of the course, and learner autonomy, that is, the degree of self-directedness allowed the learner. Moore's theory was notable for being the first American theory of distance education. The idea of a community of inquiry has been around a long time. The term is associated with John Dewey, among others, but it was D. Randy Garrison, Terry Anderson, and Walter Archer who applied community of inquiry to online education. Their model has three components. Garrison, Anderson, and Archer describe them this way. Cognitive presence is the extent to which the participants in any particular configuration of a community of inquiry are able to construct meaning through sustained communication. Social presence is the ability of learners to project their personal characteristics into the community of inquiry, thereby presenting themselves as real people. And teaching presence is defined as the design, facilitation, and direction of cognitive and social processes for the purpose of realizing personally meaningful and educationally worthwhile learning outcomes. Community of inquiry theory suggests that effective instructional design and, by extension, effective learning can be achieved when each of these elements is addressed. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Malcolm Knowles' theory of andragogy. It's a theory of adult education, but it's closely associated with distance education. Contrasting andragogy, the teaching of adults, with pedagogy, the teaching of children, Knowles noted that it's important to establish a climate conducive to adult learning, create an organizational structure for participatory learning, and diagnose students' needs for learning, differentiating between felt needs and ascribed needs. Further, it's important, Knowles wrote, to formulate directions for learning that include objectives, clarify for the student resources and strategies to accomplish objectives, indicate when objectives are accomplished, and provide quantitative and qualitative evaluation that offers re-diagnosis of needs for learning. Now, let's turn to a handful of theories that are used by both instructional technology and distance education researchers. It's an idiosyncratic bunch, selected because, well, I find them interesting. Diffusion of Innovations theory, popularized by Everett Rogers, is a wonderfully useful theory. It is explanatory in that it explains how, why, and at what rate innovations spread through social systems. This makes it useful to researchers. It's also prescriptive, providing guidance to practitioners who seek to encourage the diffusion of innovations. The theory helped researchers in Iowa understand the process by which hybrid seed corn was adopted by farmers, why an attempt to convince Peruvian villagers to boil their water failed, and why computers still feature QWERTY keyboards when better alternatives exist. And the theory can be used to encourage teachers to adopt new technologies and teaching practices. The ARCS model of motivation, designed by John Keller, provides guidance for analyzing the motivational characteristics of a group of learners and designing motivational strategies based on this analysis. Its name comes from 4 categories representing a set of conditions that are required for a person to be motivated: attention, relevance, confidence, and satisfaction. That is, it's necessary to gain the learner's attention, ensure that the content of the lesson is relevant to the learner, build the confidence of the learner, and encourage in the student a sense of satisfaction when learning goals are achieved. Keller also developed a 10-step model of motivational design as a way of applying the ARCS model. In the words of a leading expert, Charles Rigaluth, an instructional design theory is a theory that offers explicit guidance on how to better help people learn and develop. There are many instructional design theories, but they fall into at least 6 categories: instructional event theory, instructional analysis theory, instructional planning theory, instructional building theory, instructional implementation theory, and instructional evaluation theory. In clarifying what an instructional design theory is, Rigaluth notes that instructional design theories are design-oriented, and they offer methods which are situational, componential, and probabilistic. They identify the situations for which the methods should be used. They also identify the values that underlie the goals they pursue and the methods they offer to attain those goals. The technology acceptance model is an information systems theory that seeks to explain how people accept and use a technology. Its developers, Fred Davis and Richard Bogutzy, hypothesized that people's decisions to adopt and use a given technology is based to a large degree on the technology's perceived usefulness and its perceived ease of use. These factors have intuitive appeal and echo elements of diffusion theory. The technology acceptance model has been used in many studies and has been extended by multiple researchers. Learning style theory seeks to explain why people differ in the way they learn. Learning style has been conceptualized in many ways, and there are numerous learning style theories. 2 theories, or models, are especially well known. David Kolb proposed that there are 2 ways people grasp experience: through concrete experience and through abstract conceptualization, and 2 ways people transform experience: through reflective observation and through active experimentation. These can be combined to identify 4 learning styles: accommodators, who combine concrete experience and active experimentation; convergers, who combine abstract conceptualization and active experimentation; divergers, who combine concrete experience and reflective observation; and assimilators, who combine abstract conceptualization and reflective observation. The learning style inventory, based on Kolb's model, is used to identify an individual's preferred learning style. The VARK model, proposed by Neil Fleming, divides learners into 4 groups, or learning styles: visual learners, auditory learners, reading-writing preference learners, and kinesthetic learners. It's important to note that while the idea of learning styles has intuitive appeal, the theories have been criticized for resting on shaky science, and that attempts to tailor instruction for particular learning styles are ineffective. Still, the theories and models are useful for promoting self-understanding and reminding teachers that they have many tools in their instructional toolkits, that instruction that employs multiple methods will likely be more effective or at least appealing. As I indicated at the beginning of this presentation, this class session offers only the briefest of introductions to theories used by researchers in instructional technology and distance education. Later this week, I'll post a list of resources that I hope you'll find helpful. Well, gang, thanks for taking the time to watch and listen to this presentation. I hope you found it useful, if not necessarily interesting. Remember to post your reflections about this class session in the CS3 discussion forum. If you have questions about the presentation, don't hesitate to contact me via email or, even better, by telephone.